Hello friends and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will begin as usual with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome to today's Sutta class. Today we are reading the Aṭṭhakanāgara Sutta. So, the Sutta about the man from a city called Aṭṭhaka. This is Majjhima Nikaya 52. And we are reading this Sutta because last time there was a question in the live chat. And I said, well, as an answer to the question, it would be really good to read the Aṭṭhakanāgara Sutta. And so I thought it would be nice to read it all together today. And another thing is that in the live chat, in the questions, over the past few weeks or even months, there have been so many questions of people always asking about metta practice or asking about the Brahmavihara practice in general. And there are always people were asking, doesn't this lead to attachment? Isn't this like problematic? Shouldn't you be careful with this Brahmavihara practice? And so I think the Aṭṭhakanāgara Sutta really addresses this point and really explains how Brahmaviharas and metta and all the Brahmaviharas are really, really beneficial, and how that can even be your main practice, and how that can actually lead you all the way to full enlightenment, all the way to Nibbana, if you practice this properly. So to really fully address this question that keeps on coming up again and again, I think it would be really useful to read this sutta. And so that is what we are doing today. So the Aṭṭhakanāgara Sutta is also well known as the 11 doors to the Deathless. So actually most people know it as the sutta that talks about the 11 doors. That's not the official name, but that's what the sutta is about. And so some people might be familiar with that kind of name, sort of nickname. It's not a proper name, but most people kind of know it as that. And without further ado, I think we can just start right away. I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, and there is a link in the live chat also. Sutta Central does have Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, so you can all read along with this version if you like, or with any other version, up to you. And yeah, let's get started. Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Venerable Ananda was living at Biluvagamaka near Vesali. So from this introduction, we can see that this is a sutta that takes place after the parinibbana of the Buddha. So the Buddha is no longer around, and this is a sutta. This is a conversation between Ananda and a lay follower. Typically a normal sutta begins with the words, thus have I heard, and then will tell us where the Buddha is staying. So even if the sutta is not given by the Buddha, even if this is a sutta that is given by one of the chief disciples or a conversation between several chief disciples or something, still the sutta will usually give us the location of the Buddha, unless the Buddha has already entered Nibbana, in which case this is left out. So here in this sutta, since it is left out, we can conclude that this takes place after his parinibbana. And so we also know, of course, that Ananda was living for quite a while after the Buddha's passing, and Ananda also became an Arahant very shortly after the Buddha's parinibbana. So we can conclude that probably at the point when this sutta was spoken, Ananda was an Arahant and probably was one of the most senior leaders of the Sangha, because obviously Ananda had still personally known the Buddha. He was the personal attendant of the Buddha for 25 years. So Ananda was probably one of the monastics at this time who knew the Buddha most closely and who was still alive. So we can assume that Ananda was one of the most influential and most respected leaders of the Sangha at this point in time. And so he was living in a small village called Peluva near Vesali. Now on that occasion, the householder Dasama of Aṭṭhakanāgara had arrived at Pataliputta for some business or other. So the householder Dasama is not that well known, I think. I'm not sure if he appears in any other sutta. And that's easy to explain since he is from Aṭṭhakanāgara, which also is a very, very obscure place. We don't really know where that city is supposed to be. And that makes it very likely that the city is far away and that this householder is a merchant. He has traveled from very far away and he's doing business in Pataliputta. And of course, the mention of Pataliputta also tells us that this sutta takes place after the Buddha's parinibbana, since Pataliputta did not exist in the Buddha's time. In the Buddha's time, there was a small village called Pataligama. So Gama means village. So a small village called Patali. And this small village then was enlarged and fortified and was turned into the capital city of a kingdom called Magadha, the biggest kingdom after, like in the decades and centuries after the Buddha's passing. And at some point, this small village turned into a big city and then into the capital. And so here in this sutta, it's already a city. It's already no longer called Pataligama. It's called Pataliputta. In modern day, this is called Patna. The city is still there, called Patna in India. And so this is another indication that this sutta takes place after the Buddha's parinibbana. Anyway, so Dasama is in Pataliputta and doing business there. And then he went to a certain bhikkhu in Kukuta's park, so the chicken park. And after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and asked him, "Where does the Venerable Ananda live now, Venerable Sir? I wish to see the Venerable Ananda." The Venerable Ananda is living at Beluvagamaka near Vesali, householder. So then, when the householder Dasama had completed his business at Pataliputta, he went to the Venerable Ananda at Beluvagamaka near Vesali. So it seems that the householder Dasama was really, really, really intent on seeing the Venerable Ananda because there is quite a big distance between Pataliputta and Vesali. These are two different cities, two big cities. They're about 60 kilometers, a bit more than 60 kilometers apart. So that is quite a distance, especially back in the day where you had to travel on dirt roads through thick jungles that were infested by tigers and infested by bandits. So it takes a real effort to go to another city just to visit the Venerable Ananda. So this householder was really, really dedicated. It takes several days to travel. And he was really, really determined to see the Venerable Ananda. And probably that was because, as I mentioned, he seems to have come from very far away. So probably in his hometown, he doesn't have access to the Dhamma. It would be very, very hard for him to get teachings. So now that he has come to Pataliputta, this is a once in a lifetime or a very rare, at least a very rare opportunity for him to get to see a highly attained monk or nun and to get some really deep teachings. So it seems that he was very committed to Dhamma practice. It seems that he was very interested and that he made this special effort to travel to another city and to see the Venerable Ananda. So anyway, he's going and showing a lot of dedication. And after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and he asked him, "Venerable Ananda, has any one thing been proclaimed by the Blessed One who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened, wherein, if a bhikkhu abides diligent, ardent, and resolute, his unliberated mind comes to be liberated, his undestroyed taints come to be destroyed, and he attains the supreme security from bondage that he had not attained before?" So Dasama is asking whether there is one single thing that you should practice. So one single path, one single means, skillful means, one thing that you need to focus on so that if you are energetic and if you practice properly, that you can attain Nibbana. So what is the one thing that you should focus on? And Ananda says, there is, householder, indeed one such thing proclaimed by the Blessed One. So Ananda confirms that there is such a thing, and of course, Dasama then asks, what is that one thing, Venerable Ananda? And Ananda says, here, householder, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. He considers this and understands it thus. This first jhana is conditioned and volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. If he is steady in that, he attains the destruction of the taints. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints, because of that desire for the Dhamma, that delight in the Dhamma, then with the destruction of the 5 lower fetters, he becomes one due to reappear spontaneously in the pure abodes, and there attain final Nibbana without ever returning from that world. This is one thing proclaimed by the Blessed One who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened, wherein if a bhikkhu abides diligent, ardent, and resolute, his unliberated mind comes to be liberated, his undestroyed taints come to be destroyed, and he attains the supreme security from bondage that he had not attained before. So, Ananda says the one thing that the Buddha taught, whereas if you practice this diligently, then you can attain Nibbana. This one thing is the first jhana. So he gives us the stock passage here of the first jhana with the various jhana factors, vitaka and vichara, here translated as applied and sustained thought, and then piti and sukha, here translated as rapture and pleasure. So all the stock passage of the first jhana, this is the one thing, but this is not enough. So entering a jhana is very good, but this is only a samadhi state, so just entering the jhana is not enough. What you also have to do is you have to develop wisdom, so you have to consider what you're doing, you have to understand what you're doing. As Ananda says here, you have to be very clear this first jhana is conditioned and volitionally produced. So it is based on conditions, it's not stable, it's not eternal, it's impermanent. When the conditions fall away, you will also come out of this first jhana. So whether you're a practitioner doing meditation and entering jhana, obviously at some point you will come out of jhana again within a few minutes, within a few hours, even within a few days, but not much more than a few days. Eventually you have to come out of jhana again, or even if you are reborn as one of the gods in the jhana realms, those gods are called Brahma gods. So if you're reborn as a Brahma, then of course you can stay in that first jhana for a longer period of time. But even then, your lifespan is limited, your lifespan is impermanent. Eventually you will die and fall away from that state. And so however you enter that first jhana as a rebirth or as a meditation state, eventually those conditions that led you to be reborn there or led you to enter that state will come to an end, and you will come out of that. So what you have to understand is that this is conditioned and it is impermanent, it is subject to cessation. And then Ananda says, if you're steady in that, that means if you have really, really deeply internalized this knowledge, if you've really developed wisdom to the core, if you don't cling to that state anymore at all, then you can attain arahantship based on the first jhana and based on those reflections, based on that wisdom that is developing from those insights. But if you don't quite fully develop the wisdom yet, then you can become an anagami. So you destroy the 5 lower fetters and you get reborn in the pure abodes. And the pure abodes, they're also a rebirth that is on the same level as a jhana state. So you're no longer reborn in any of the lower realms, not in any of the sense sphere heavens or in the human world as a non-returner. That's why it's called a non-returner. And you will then keep on practicing in those pure abodes and attain final nibbana from there. So if you really deeply develop wisdom based on the first jhana, you can either become an arahant or you can become a non-returner. And so why does Ananda single out the first jhana here? And that is, of course, because the first jhana is the first step out where you step out, or the first time where you can step out of the sensual world. And this is really very important. In Buddhism, we talk about 3 worlds or 3 realms: the sensual realm, or called the kama loka, and then, of course, the fine material realm, called the rupa loka, and then the immaterial realm, called the arupa loka. And our ordinary attachments, our ordinary greed that we have, our ordinary aversion that we have, all this is attachment to various objects or persons or views or anything to do with the sensual world. So it is very important to be able to step out of that sensual world into the fine material world. That is where the first jhana is. So that when you step out of that, you see how that is really all undesirable, how that all brings you suffering, and then you are able to let go of all these attachments, all your greed and all your aversion that is connected to the sensual world. And if you're able to do that, then and if you really can develop wisdom based on that, then it is possible, as Ananda here says, to make a breakthrough to arahantship. And so, as I mentioned, the jhanas are on that plane of the fine material world. So that is a possibility to step out of that sensual world and see the sensual world from the outside, instead of being right in the middle of it and being totally enmeshed in all these attachments and connections that we have with the usual sensual world in our daily experience. So for that reason, the first jhana is one possibility to make that breakthrough to arahantship. And then Ananda says, again, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, a bhikkhu enters and abides in the second jhana. He considers this and understands it thus. This second jhana is conditioned and volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. If he is steady in that, he attains the destruction of the taints. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints, then ... and so on, he will become a non-returner. This too is one thing proclaimed by the Blessed One, wherein if a bhikkhu abides diligent, ardent, and resolute, he attains the supreme security from bondage that he had not attained before. So now, in what follows now, Ananda goes through the second, the third, and the fourth jhana. So, as I mentioned, this sutta is called the 11 Doors to the Deathless. So Ananda is not only giving Dasama one thing that the Buddha taught for the attainment of Nibbana, he is giving him 11 things. The first thing was the first jhana, and now the second, third, and fourth thing that he is giving the householder are the rest of the 4 jhanas. So the second, the third, and the fourth jhana. And in each of these 3 higher jhanas, Ananda is giving him the stock passage of that particular jhana with all the jhana factors of that particular jhana. And then Ananda explains how you develop wisdom, insight based on that jhana. Because, of course, jhana states are just samadhi states. Samadhi alone is not enough for the breakthrough to arahantship. You need to have the wisdom too. And Ananda explains how you develop that wisdom based on those jhanas. So based on leaving the sensual realm, entering the fine material realm, and then seeing from the outside all the bondage and all the suffering that you get from the greed and the hatred, so the attachments that you have with the sensual realm. And then also that helps you to cut off all the attachment you have to the sensual realm. Then also developing wisdom about the jhanas, so cutting off the attachments you have to the higher realms, the fine material realm and immaterial realm, and then being totally free from any kind of attachment to any of the three realms. So in the same way that you can practice with the first jhana, in exactly the same way you practice with the second, the third, and the fourth jhana. So these are the first 4 doors, and then we have a few more doors to go. And then Ananda says, again, a bhikkhu abides pervading 1/4 with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the second, likewise the third, likewise the fourth. So above, below, around, and everywhere, to all as to himself. He abides pervading the all-encompassing world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, abundant, exalted, immeasurable, without hostility and without ill will. He considers this and understands it thus. This deliverance of mind through loving kindness is conditioned and volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. If he is steady in that, he attains the destruction of the taints. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints, and so on, he becomes an anagami. This too is one thing proclaimed by the Blessed One, wherein if a bhikkhu abides diligent, ardent, and resolute, and so on, he attains nibbana. So now the 5th door that Ananda is talking about is the first of the Brahmaviharas, so metta practice, the practice of loving kindness. And so, again, as I mentioned just now, what is important first is to be able to step out of this sensual realm into a fine material realm, so a realm that is equivalent to a jhana state. And here, of course, a Brahmavihara, as the name already suggests, is able to do that. So if we perfect metta practice, then we can enter the fine material realm through our metta practice. That is why it is called a Brahmavihara. So vihara means abiding or a dwelling place. And Brahma, as I mentioned, are the gods that are reborn in a jhana state or on this fine material plane. So for that reason, the metta and the other 3, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, and upekkha, equanimity, these are called Brahmaviharas because they can lead you to this fine material plane. They can lead you to a rebirth as a Brahma god. For that reason, they're called Brahmaviharas. But of course, you have to really do it properly. You can't just practice it 5 minutes a day and then think that this is actual metta practice. It has to be done all the way as it is described here, pervading the entire world all around you, every single being in this world, with a heart that is entirely open, with a mind that doesn't have any kind of barriers, where there is no more hatred towards any kind of being present, where there is no more greed towards anything present. Because if you have greed, you're holding things back. You're erecting barriers in your mind. You wouldn't freely share everything with everyone. You wouldn't really practice compassion towards everyone. So all this attachment to the sensual realm, all the hatred in the mind and all the greed in the mind has to be entirely let go for metta practice to come to full perfection. So of course you have to really develop it to full perfection in order to be able to enter those jhana states and to really develop it to the highest possible point. So you can see that metta practice actually doesn't lead to more attachment. If you practice metta properly, it will lead to much, much less attachment, to lessening all the greed in your mind, to lessening, especially also lessening all the ill will, the anger, the hatred in your mind. So rather than, like, people always think that metta practice can lead to more attachments, it can lead to a lot of problems, it can cause obstacles on the path. If you practice it properly, then the opposite is true. If you practice it properly, it will really open up your mind. It will really open up your heart. And it can lead you all the way to Nibbana if you combine it with those insight practices that Ananda mentions here. So metta practice can lead you into very, very deep samadhi, into samadhi states that are equivalent to jhana. And it can be the basis for those liberating insights that will allow you to make a breakthrough to arahantship or to anagamiship. So metta practice isn't just some minor kind of practice for beginners or that you should do for 5 minutes at the end of your real meditation practice. Metta practice can be a full practice in and of itself. And metta practice is really a very, very powerful tool and a really very powerful practice if you practice it properly. So there's nothing to fear in metta practice. You don't have to be worried that you'll get more attached. You don't have to be worried that this will create any kind of obstacle on your path. If you do it properly and if you're able to really create that feeling of metta and to really open up your heart and your mind, then this is a really amazing and very powerful thing to do and very, very beneficial on the path. So this is what Ananda describes here. And of course, then you also develop the insight, see how this is conditioned, how this is, even that is impermanent, and then develop insight and make the breakthrough to arahantship based on this metta practice. And then in the same way, Ananda also goes through the other 3 Brahmaviharas, compassion, so karuna, sympathetic joy, mudita, and upekkha, equanimity. So now we have gone through the 4 jhanas and the 4 Brahmaviharas. So we have seen 8 of the 11 doors to the deathless. And we still have 3 more to go. So let's see which 3 are still left. So of course, these 3 are from the immaterial realm, the arupa states. And Ananda now explains the following. Again, with the complete surmounting of perceptions of form, with the disappearance of perceptions of sensory impact, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, aware that space is infinite, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the base of infinite space. He considers this and understands it thus. This attainment of the base of infinite space is conditioned and volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. If he is steady in that, he attains the destruction of the taints. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints, and so on, he becomes a non-returner. This too is one thing proclaimed by the Blessed One, wherein if a bhikkhu abides diligent, ardent, and resolute, he attains the supreme security from bondage that he had not attained before. So he attains Nibbana. So now Ananda starts to explain about the immaterial states. These are states that we can develop based on the 4th jhana. So after we have developed mastery over the 4 jhanas, so the fine material realm, then it is possible, if your samadhi is strong, that you can enter the immaterial realm. And the immaterial realm also has 4 stages. And the first of those 4 stages is the attainment of the perception of infinite space. And of course, this is even a higher jhana state, or sorry, not a jhana state, even a higher samadhi state. And so you have even less defilements present in the mind. Your mind is even more clear, even more pure. It's even easier for wisdom to see through things and to understand how the mind works. So again, based on this, you can develop wisdom. And the higher you go in samadhi and the clearer your mind gets, the easier it should be to develop wisdom, because it's easier to clearly understand how the mind works. It's easier to clearly see reality as it actually is. So it's much easier to see how everything is conditioned, how dependent origination works, and how everything is impermanent, and how everything is subject to cessation. So it should be much easier. The higher you go up in samadhi, it should be easier to let things go. And so this can also serve as a basis for arahantship, for that insight that can lead you to arahantship. And then, of course, after infinite space comes infinite consciousness. So this is the 10th door to the deathless. And then the last one that Ananda mentions here is the following one, nothingness. And Ananda says, again, by completely surmounting the base of infinite consciousness, aware that there's nothing, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the base of nothingness. And so on, and so on. This is another thing that can lead to arahantship or to anagamiship. And this too is one thing proclaimed by the Blessed One who knows and sees, accomplished and fully enlightened, wherein if a bhikkhu abides diligent, ardent, and resolute, his unliberated mind comes to be liberated, his undestroyed taints come to be destroyed, and he attains the supreme security from bondage that he had not attained before. When the Venerable Ananda had spoken, the householder Dasama of Aṭṭhakanāgara said to him, Venerable Ananda, just as if a man seeking one entrance to a hidden treasure came all at once upon 11 entrances to a hidden treasure, so too, while I was seeking one door to the deathless, I have come all at once to hear of 11 doors to the deathless. So Dasama is very happy, he rejoices, and he says it's like finding a hidden treasure. He's comparing the attainment of Nibbana with finding a hidden treasure. So, of course, Nibbana is much more valuable than any kind of worldly treasure, but of course, it's a very beautiful simile. And this is also where this nickname of the sutta comes from, about the 11 doors to the deathless, because this is what Dasama calls it here. He came all at once across those 11 doors to the deathless. And then he also says, just as if a man had a house with 11 doors, and when that house caught on fire, he could flee to safety by any of these 11 doors. So I can flee to safety by any of these 11 doors to the deathless. So it seems that he has quite a bit of right view. He understands that there is a lot of danger in samsara, and that safety only lies in attaining Nibbana. And he says he can flee to safety. He can flee to Nibbana through any of these 11 doors. And I think it's very interesting that he uses, again, a fire metaphor. Fire metaphors are fairly common in the suttas. There is also a very famous sutta called the Fire Sermon, or the Aditta Sutta, also called the Aditta Pariyaya Sutta, which is a very famous sutta, one of the first 3 suttas that the Buddha spoke, actually the 3rd sutta that the Buddha gave after he started teaching, just after his enlightenment. And with that sutta, he converted 1,000 fire-worshipping ascetics to Buddhism, and they all turned into Arahants through listening to this fire sermon, where the Buddha was teaching that the entire world is on fire, is burning, that all of samsara is burning. And so those fire metaphors for samsara are very common, because samsara, like if you clearly see samsara is so uncomfortable, it's just like being constantly roasted on a fire, and there is no safety to be found in samsara. So again, here there is another fire metaphor, but it really reminds me of that very famous sermon. And probably that sermon, the fire sermon, was also well known back in the day, and probably also known to Dasama. So, and Dasama continues and says, Venerable Sir, these sectarians will even seek a teacher's fee for their teacher. Why shouldn't I make an offering to the Venerable Ananda? So Dasama points out that ascetics or renunciates or spiritual practitioners of other religions, non-Buddhists, they actually charge for their teaching. But of course, Ananda didn't charge for teaching the Dharma. The Dharma should always be freely given. There shouldn't be any monetary requests being made when you teach Dharma. So Dassama points out other people charge, Venerable Ananda doesn't charge, but he wants to voluntarily make a donation because he is so inspired. He wants to support Ananda and he wants to make an offering. And so then the householder Dassama of Aṭṭhakanāgara assembled the Sangha of bhikkhus from Pataliputta and Vesali, and with his own hands he served and satisfied them with various kinds of good food. He presented a pair of cloths to each bhikkhu, and he presented a triple robe to the Venerable Ananda. And he had a dwelling worth 500, probably 500 coins, maybe gold coins or some other kind of coin, but it seems that this was a very high sum, a very high price, or very large amount of money here. So he had a dwelling worth 500 coins built for the Venerable Ananda. So Dassama seems to have been really rich and also really, really inspired. So he got the monastic Sangha of those two very, very large cities. So that must have been a very large Sangha that he got to assemble, brought together, and he offered 3 requisites. He offered food, he offered robes, and he also offered a huge dwelling, probably some kind of assembly hall or something, to the Venerable Ananda. So he was very inspired, and he wanted to show his gratitude for this really beautiful teaching. So this is the sutta about the 11 doors of the Deathless, and people might wonder why there are 11 doors, and how come that some people make a breakthrough even after just attaining the first jhana, and other people have to go even up to the immaterial realms. I think it all depends on your wisdom faculty. So we've talked about this a lot. We have talked about this in, like last year in November, we had this whole series of talks about people who are samadhi types and people who are wisdom types, and how they are all different, and how they should also practice differently, and how they also make the breakthrough to arahantship in different ways. So if you don't remember, you can check that out. All the videos are still on YouTube. But one of the things that we saw back then is that people who have a very strong wisdom faculty, so the wisdom types, they typically don't need that much samadhi to make a breakthrough to arahantship. So for the wisdom types, probably they can make a breakthrough quite early, according to the sutta, even after the first jhana or one of the lower jhanas. And if you are a samadhi type, that means your wisdom faculty is comparatively a little bit not that strong. So you need to develop higher stages of samadhi in order to make that breakthrough. So because the higher you go up in samadhi, the clearer your mind gets, the calmer your mind gets, the more easy it is to make to really see what is going on with your wisdom faculty. So even if your wisdom faculty isn't that strong, because your mind is so clear, it will be easy for you to see. So for that reason, samadhi types kind of develop very strong samadhi first before they make that breakthrough to arahantship. And for that reason, people make that breakthrough at different points on the development of samadhi. Some people seem to make it even after the first jhana. Other people go on to higher stages, even the immaterial realms, before they make that breakthrough. So this was the sutta about the 11 doors to the Deathless. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the live chat, and I will see if I can answer them. So, okay, I see lots of people are joining. Nice to see you all on the live chat. Okay, so many Anjalis there. Nice to see so many people. Okay, haven't found any questions so far. Just lots and lots of comments. Somebody says Brahmaviharana, not Vihara. No, actually, this is called Brahmavihara. Brahmaviharana is, I think, the Sinhala version or something, but in Pali and in English, we call this Brahmavihara. And then I see, I see Claudia's question, why is Ananda leaving out the fourth immaterial jhana as a door to the deathless? And then I think Pia and Indira Valpola have a very similar question, so I will take those two questions together. Why is the fourth arupa jhana not mentioned here, i.e. neither perception nor non-perception? Is it because here perception is so subtle and not possible to contemplate on the conditional arising and impermanence? So I think Pia and Indira are correct. There are several other suttas that kind of touch on this point. I think the most obvious one to explain this point is the Anupada Sutta, which is the Majjhima Nikaya 111. And that is a sutta that explains Sariputta's progress, how he was practicing before he made the breakthrough to arahantship. And so that also explains that Sariputta was entering all these stages, the four jhanas and then the immaterial realms and so on. And in each of those states, he was contemplating also on all the factors and making insight, like developing insight and so on, developing his wisdom, because as we all know, Sariputta was the disciple of the Buddha who was foremost in wisdom on the monk's side. So Sariputta had a huge amount of wisdom, and that is that he had to develop while he was practicing for arahantship. So he spent quite a bit of time in each of those stages and really developing very deep insight into all the different factors that come together in those stages. And so according to the Anupada Sutta, while he was being in those stages, he was contemplating and making those insights. So it's not that he came out of those stages and then contemplated, but he contemplated while he was in that state. And he did that for the four jhanas, and then he did that also for the first three of the immaterial realms, just as in this sutta that we've read today. And then when he was in the fourth of the immaterial realms, so neither perception nor non-perception, and while he was in cessation, he couldn't do those contemplations because the mind is far too subtle. So when you don't have proper perception anymore, you cannot make those insights anymore. So what the Anupada Sutta explains to us is that he had to come out of that stage. And after he had come out of the stage, he did the contemplations afterwards, but only for those two, only for the fourth immaterial stage and for the cessation attainment. So while you're in those stages, you cannot make those insights. And for that reason, that is not a door to the deathless, because through that stage, you cannot attain Nibbana. You can only attain Nibbana after you have been in that stage, after you have come out again and you do the contemplations, you like develop that wisdom, you develop those insights. And of course, if you come out of that stage, typically you would either be in one of the lower jhanas, or it might be you wouldn't be in any kind of jhana at all while you contemplate. So for that reason, you can't really call it a door to the deathless, because you have to come out first before you can attain Nibbana. And I think that is the reason why they are not included here in our sutta that we have read today. If you're interested, we can also read the Anupada Sutta next week, maybe, because I think it's also a very beautiful, very interesting sutta. And let's see if there are more questions. And Susie says, what's the name of the sutra? So the sutta we are reading today is called the Aṭṭhakanāgara Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 52. And the sutta I was mentioning just now, where Sariputta's progress towards Nibbana is described, is called the Anupada Sutta, and that is Majjhima Nikaya number 111. And suttas, in terms of loving kindness, does one who has fully developed it, can they still function in this world as a layperson? Of course, you can still function in the world if you have developed loving kindness, metta practice. Actually, things will be much more smoothly for you because you have very good relationships with people around you. There will be a lot less conflicts in your life, especially you won't have any conflicts in your own mind anymore. So you will be free from ill will. I, 1 Assuming that you haven't made the breakthrough to arahantship yet, you can still live in the world as a layperson. Once you make the breakthrough to arahantship, it is very likely that you might want to renounce the world and become a monastic. Sud's question has a part 2, and this is given that it is difficult to differentiate between loyalty to oneself and others. Well, I think if you really practice metta to the full extent, you will see that actually this different, like making a difference between oneself and others, like erecting this barrier in the mind between oneself and others, this is what leads to conflicts. This is also what leads to a lot of suffering. So if you do metta practice to the full extent, you will also, of course, make insights into non-self, and then you will see that it is actually much more beneficial not to differentiate between oneself and others, and just freely give, freely share, and also like freely practice loving kindness towards all people, like to yourself and also to everyone else. So it's not that you like neglect yourself, you harm yourself just to please others, but you take good care of yourself, but in the same way you take good care of everyone else. So yeah, I think like you don't have to worry about metta practice. You don't have to worry that you will start to neglect yourself and you will make yourself suffer or anything. Metta practice has to include yourself as well. It doesn't just include other people. So, and Aṭṭhakanāgara asks, is there any functional difference in the liberation obtained by these ways in the way the Buddhas are different from ordinary Arahants? So obviously, if you are a fully enlightened Buddha, like a Samma Sambuddha has all the Samadhi attainments. So a Samma Sambuddha doesn't make a breakthrough to Samma Sambuddhaship based on the first jhana or something. Samma Sambuddha will develop all the jhanas and all the immaterial attainments and the cessation attainment. So Samma Sambuddha is very skilled in the full range of Samadhi practices, as well as the insight practices, as well as the psychic powers, and so on. But the liberation of mind, like the full liberation from all the defilements in the mind, is the same for an Arahant and for a Buddha. So both an Arahant and a Buddha don't have any defilements in their mind, and both an Arahant and Buddhas can attain Nibbana in the same way. So there's no difference in the attainment of Nibbana. That is the same for everybody. But of course, somebody who has higher jhanas might be able to access the psychic powers. So it is usually said that for the development of the psychic powers, you at least need to have the fourth jhana. So if you have attained arahantship based on the first jhana, it's very likely that you wouldn't be able to access the psychic powers, for example. So in that way, maybe you could say there are a few differences, but psychic powers are still considered a very mundane attainment. It has nothing to do with the liberation of your mind, with the attainment of Nibbana. So in that sense, you could say there may be a few differences, but ultimately in terms of liberation, there isn't really a difference. And then Deepak Sharma says, what does Buddhism say, I guess, or teach about rebirth and after death? So Buddhism teaches that there is a wheel of rebirth, a cycle of rebirth. We call this samsara. And so, after death, you just get reborn again, unless you are fully enlightened. If you're fully enlightened, you attain Nibbana. If you aren't fully enlightened, you get reborn according to the karma that you have made. If you have made a lot of good karma, that will lead you to a higher realm. If you made a lot of bad karma, that will lead you to a lower realm. But even that next rebirth isn't permanent. So if you get reborn in a heaven realm, that will not last forever. It's not like a Christian teaching where you get reborn in heaven and you're happy ever after. But eventually that lifespan will also come to an end and you will get reborn again and again and again and again. And the same with the lower realms. If you get reborn in a hell realm, that also isn't permanent. Rebirth can last for a very long time, for many eons, can last longer than the lifespan of a universe in a very high realm. But eventually, every life will come to an end, and you will have to move on into a new rebirth over and over again. So that seems to have been the last question. So I hope you enjoyed today's sutta, the Aṭṭhakanāgara Sutta. And so we can end the sutta class today with 3 sadhus as usual. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So have a good day and have a good week, and I will see you all next Tuesday.